Welcome everyone to Sunday mornings at the Marxist Library. A quick note before we start, this session is being recorded and will be posted on YouTube with a link on our website, ICCSmarx.org, within the next few days. In pre-pandemic times, this weekly program was hosted at the Nebel Proctor Marxist Library located in Oakland, California, USA. During the pandemic, we have been meeting every Sunday morning, California time, on Zoom. In fact, what we'd like to do is wish everybody a good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, because we now have attendees from throughout the United States and even from around the world. My name is Alan Miller, and I'm a member of the program committee that organizes Sunday mornings at the Marxist Library. And I'd like to start off by saying that we always welcome input, feedback, suggestions for topics and speakers. You can sign up for email notifications for our sessions on our website at ICCSmarx.org. For over a decade and a half, Sunday mornings at the Marxist Library programs have been a platform for diverse presentations on a variety of topics such as political economy, capitalism, socialism, communism, supporting the struggles of the working class, the fight against imperialism, militarism and war, supporting the environmental movement, and the fight for racial and gender justice. We wish to remind everyone that this is a comradely forum for political discourse and debate. As such, we ask that you show respect for other participants and the moderator of today's session. Please note that the opinions that are expressed here are those of the speaker and participants. They do not represent the ICCS or the Marxist Library. However, we are united in our respect for the work of Karl Marx, and we believe that his work remains relevant today. Our motto is taken from Karl Marx's 11th thesis on Feuerbach. The philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it. Our session today features American political scientist and specialist in anti-imperialist and socialist projects, Edward Leger Smith from Midwestern Marx, a Marxist educational institute that originated in the Midwestern United States. Eddie will be speaking on the crisis of American healthcare post-COVID-19. And before we start, I just want to let you know that originally we were supposed to have two speakers from Midwestern Marx, and Carlos contacted me Saturday night and profusely apologized that he would be unable to make the session today because his wife just gave birth to a baby boy and he wasn't sure if they were going to be discharged from the hospital. So today, in 16 years of presentations, this is the first time we've ever had a speaker cancel because of the birth of a child. So we want to Eddie, we want to express our congratulations to Carlos and tell him that we're going to hold his spot. We want to have him come as soon as he is able to. So with no more, I'm going to ask Eddie to go ahead and maybe do a little bit more introduction today of what is Midwestern Marx and a little bit about yourself, and go ahead and move into your presentation. So thank you, Eddie. Welcome to Sunday mornings at the Marxist Library.
Thank you very much. And I know Carlos was really upset he couldn't be here today. He would have given just about anything to be here. So thank you so much for having us. It's truly an honor to be able to present to all these great people. So yeah, thanks on behalf of me and Carlos. So Carlos and I started Midwestern Marx when we both graduated from the same undergraduate university where we were neighbors in our junior and senior year. And after we graduated, after the Bernie campaign had ended in 2020, we decided to start a little press outlet, writing articles, posting videos, just educating people about Marxism and dialectical materialism in general. At that point in time, I was still pretty new to Marxism, and I was still, developing and educating myself, and getting to understand the basic principles, so that I could teach them to people. And Carlos was instrumental in that, in helping my own development. But what really ended up happening, that helped our project get big was, some videos that went viral on TikTok, which, at first we thought it was pretty silly, to be using an app like TikTok to try and educate people. But the more that we've continued with our project, the more we've realized that, you need to utilize whatever means of communication are available to you. And TikTok is simply where a lot of young people are right now, and where you can reach a lot of young people. So we've just tried to expand and use any kind of means of communication we can, to reach people. TikTok, of course, banned our first account that had 375,000 followers, I believe. And it's recently also been exposed that TikTok's content managers are former State Department and NATO officials, who were hired on to manage the content, probably to suppress people like us. But ultimately, we view our project and the success of our project as a product of the material conditions. Most people are surprised that there's a Midwestern outlet in the Midwest at all, or a Marxist outlet in the Midwest at all, rather. But I always say it's a product of material conditions. It's a product of the deteriorating living conditions for workers, in the Midwest. The fact that so many people are now looking for an alternative, are looking for a criticism of capitalism or something like Marxism. So yeah, personally, I grew up in Wisconsin. So my dad was a teacher, and I witnessed the mass teacher strikes that went down in Wisconsin, when Governor Scott Walker, who was heavily funded by the Koch brothers, dismantled the teachers' unions and gave them a major pay cut, which he said was to fix the state debt. Wisconsin's state debt currently stands at over $20 billion. And Governor Scott Walker turned around and gave a multi-billion-dollar tax break to the multinational corporation Foxconn. So he was okay with using government money, for international corporations, but he wasn't okay with using it for education. And he continually villainized the teachers, made the teachers out to be the lazy villains, who are the real reason that living standards had been decreasing in Wisconsin, divided the working mass of Wisconsin. And growing up watching that, it was just so obvious to me, that these politicians were corrupt, and that they weren't looking out for people's best interest, that they were only looking out for the profit motivations of their corporate donors. So went to college and studied politics, met Carlos there, worked on the 2020 Bernie campaign with Carlos. Also there sort of saw the failures of electoral politics, and the way that the Democratic Party coalesced to suppress the Bernie campaign, really forced us to get more radical, or get more serious about organizing. And that's how we found Marxism, and eventually started Midwestern Marx. And we've just been developing ourselves theoretically ever since, as well as developing our project and trying to reach more and more people. So yeah, that's kind of the history of Midwestern Marx. Currently, I'm in graduate school coaching wrestling, and getting a master's degree in healthcare administration, which is where a lot of the information and research about my presentation today came from. So yeah, I'm just trying to look at healthcare administration from a Marxist perspective as much as possible. And I'm finding that there's a lot of value in that, based on the influence and the size of the corporate healthcare conglomerates, or the healthcare capitalists, who are a major part of the current American or Western capitalist economy. So yeah, unless anyone has any questions about Midwestern Marx or anything like that, I guess I'll just transition into the presentation then. Sounds good. All right, so as we were saying, healthcare is an extremely important part of the overall American or Western capitalist economy. 19.7% of US GDP is made up by healthcare expenditures. And the entire industry is controlled by giant conglomerates. Some of the major conglomerates are CVS Group, United Health Group, McKesson Corporation, AmerisourceBergen Group, and many others. And these conglomerates are usually made up of multiple healthcare companies, whether it be providers, ambulance companies, companies that sell healthcare equipment. They all coalesce into these conglomerates. These conglomerates then are owned by investors or investment groups. So groups like Vanguard or BlackRock, made up of very wealthy Wall Street investors who manage their wealth in stocks, are who are invested in CVS Group and United Health Group and own the majority of the shares. So throughout the entire COVID-19 pandemic, groups like Vanguard and BlackRock paid out millions and millions of dollars in quarterly dividends to their shareholders, people who own stock in the healthcare industry. So the pandemic itself was a giant money-making opportunity, and greatly enriched pharmaceutical companies and these giant conglomerates who control the healthcare industry and control public health. Speaking of public health and public health decisions, these are, in the field of healthcare administration, decisions that affect the health of all of society. Public health decisions are any decision, policy decision, or otherwise that affects the health of the masses. And these decisions are greatly controlled by the investors who control the major healthcare conglomerates, heavily based on Wall Street. So groups like BlackRock and Vanguard are making a lot of the public health decisions. And as you can imagine, they tend to prioritize their own profit motivations before the overall health of the public. In my healthcare administration textbook this year, I was reading a chapter where they praised the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, as well as the Rockefeller Foundation, for their role in crafting modern public health. So healthcare administrators or people studying healthcare administration are being primed to just respect and praise and listen to the likes of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, the Wall Street investors who largely control the healthcare industry. So a modern Marxist analysis of the US economy necessitates an analysis of these conglomerates and the investors who control them, just because of how big they are, the fact that they make up nearly 20% of the US GDP. They're some of the most powerful conglomerates in the world. And they're also attached to these investors like BlackRock and Vanguard, who are invested all sorts of other places. Recently, BlackRock was in the news because miners in Alabama went on strike against BlackRock, who was in control of the mining situation in Alabama, which just shows you that these these investment groups like BlackRock and Vanguard are everywhere. They control the extraction industries, the mining industries, they control healthcare. They're heavily involved in the banking industry, or there's a lot of overlap between the healthcare conglomerates and the banking industry. So they're some of the most powerful capitalists in the modern economy. And I think that, Marx basically predicted this happening with his theory of accumulation and the concentration of capital. So Marx is noticing that capitalism has a tendency to accumulate and concentrate itself in the 1800s. And since Marx's time and today, these phenomena have developed to an absurd degree, to the point where we have an incredible amount of accumulation and concentration of wealth and power at the top. In Marx's time, industrial capitalists were dominant, but Marx was noticing this quickly emerging class of financial capitalists or bankers who were quickly merging with the industrial capitalists. Lenin would further analyze this development in 1917 with his book Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, where he dubbed the merger of the banks and the industrial capitalists as finance capital. This leads to financialization of the entire economy, the dominance of speculators, investors, and banks. And this is what dominates the American economy today, as well as the American healthcare system. It is finance capital. The merger of capitalists and banks and their concentration at the top into these small groups that seem to own a stock or own stake in everything, like BlackRock and Vanguard. The modern healthcare system and the finance capitalists who dominate it also play a major role in imperialism. During the pandemic, Western pharmaceutical companies and the World Health Organization enforced a vaccine apartheid on the global South, preventing them from getting various medical supplies and trying to use the pandemic as a weapon, as a part of what Vijay Prashad calls a hybrid war. Various methods like sanctions, or preventing countries from importing certain commodities, attempting to starve these countries out, foment regime change, and basically starve people into overthrowing their own government. Two major examples of the vaccine apartheid during the pandemic were Venezuela, where a Scandinavian bank allowed for Venezuela to pay for 90% of their COVAX vaccine before blocking the last 10% of Venezuela's payment so that they were unable to complete the payment and get the vaccine and vaccinate their people. A very similar thing happened to Cuba when they were trying to get ventilators during the pandemic. So you see how these finance capitalists who dominate the healthcare industry are using the healthcare industry to try and starve out the enemies of the US State Department and enemies of the US finance capitalist class, or Western finance capitalist class, I should say. So Marx, of course, also talked about the commodification of everything that happens as capitalism develops. The bourgeoisie finds a way to commodify, sell, and create surplus value from everything. And today, healthcare has become fully commodified. The ruling class of finance capitalists is fully dependent upon the profits they extract from it as well, which is part of the reason you're not able, or we haven't seen a move to a public, more sensible system, because of course, capitalism always has to expand. And now that the capitalists are making 20% of their revenue off of the healthcare industry, there's no way they're going to give that up. You know, they're completely reliant on the absurd profits that they now extract by selling people healthcare. Reminds me of Marx's famous quote from the Communist Manifesto: "All that is solid melts into air, all that is holy is profane. And man is at last compelled to face with sober senses his real conditions of life and his relations with his kind. The need of a constantly expanding market for its products chases the bourgeoisie all over the entire surface of the globe." So I think the way that the ruling capitalist class is fully commodified, something that's a necessity for everyday people like healthcare, and the way that they use that industry for imperialist purposes globally is a perfect example of how capitalism commodifies everything, and makes every industry one that serves the capitalist class and the imperialist capitalist class. So there is so much value, I believe, in pointing out the commodification of healthcare to workers, especially American workers. 60% of Americans have had medical debt at some point, and estimates go even higher when it comes to that. And some estimates say that as many as 40% of Americans currently have medical debt today. So nearly half of our country is being strapped with debt by this industry dominated by finance capitalists. So if you look at working class Republicans, or people who fell into the MAGA movement, you see they already hate Bill Gates. They already hate a lot of these conglomerates, and they're aware of the stranglehold that people like Bill Gates have on public health. So this creates the conditions for us to educate people on what the real root of the problem is here. You know, these people's hatred or disdain for Bill Gates can very easily be focused on capital. No, it's not Bill Gates. It's the relations of production. It's capital, which leads to accumulation, concentration, and the commodification of everything. And recently, we've had the emergence of what's being called MAGA communism, Make America Great Again communism, basically an attempt to steer the communist movement towards the MAGA movement and win these people over. But I just do not see this as the key for educating people on the root of our problem. You know, we don't need MAGA communism, we just need communism, and more specifically, the dialectical materialist method, which has always been our strongest weapon as communists, which can help workers see what the real root of the problem is. But instead of taking the initiative to educate the masses during the pandemic, I feel that most of the American left became extremely condescending towards anybody who disagreed with them throughout most of the pandemic. Most academics and middle-class leftists threw their support behind public health policies that were being directly crafted by the ruling class. For example, employer mandates, and we don't have to have a debate about vaccine mandates today, but understand that Pfizer and Bill Gates and these Wall Street investors do not care about mandates for the sake of public health. They don't care about vaccinating people in order to protect the health of the masses. They care about protecting Pfizer's profits. And that's why mandates are valuable to these investors. Many on the left dismissed the working class people's concerns about young children missing school and dealing with the lack of social interaction during this critical stage of development. I myself was supposed to compete in the 2020 Division III NCAA national tournament, but it was canceled for COVID last minute. I was devastated at the time. I had trained my whole life for that tournament, and I looked on Twitter and saw hordes of leftists mocking anybody who was sad about losing multiple seasons of competition when it comes to sports. And I just don't think this is the right attitude. We need to meet people with compassion. Leftists also cheered on censorship and supported increased biosecurity policies. They dismissed anybody who was questioning the origins of COVID as a conspiracy theorist. And now we have the Lancet COVID Commission releasing their final report, which suggests that there is much evidence that COVID may have in fact leaked from a laboratory related to U.S. biodefense research, which was heavily funded by Anthony Fauci's NIAID as well as USAID. And a lot of this biodefense funding was facilitated by Dick Cheney after 9/11. There's also evidence in the Lancet COVID Commission's final report that points to an inner cover-up by those who were invested in these biodefense programs, who didn't want the narrative to get out there that they might have that the virus might have leaked from a U.S. funded lab. So Christian Parenti, the son of Michael Parenti, wrote an article for the Gray Zone, basically making the same criticisms that I've made here, called How the Organized Left Got COVID Wrong, Learned to Love Lockdowns, and Lost Its Mind. Now, from a public health perspective or a healthcare administrative perspective, I don't necessarily agree with Christian Parenti because he tends to downplay the severity of the disease and the effectiveness of vaccines. And, vaccines have been proven to be very effective. That's what the Lancet COVID Commission came to a conclusion about, that more vaccines would have in fact decreased or slowed the spread of COVID. But I do think Christian Parenti provides a valuable critique of the modern left. He even suggests that many academics did not see the concerns of the working class when it came to lockdowns, because for one, academics tend to have their means of subsistence met more than workers, so they have less to worry about when it comes to a lockdown, preventing them from work. Than say someone who works in a blue collar industry. But Parenti also suggests that most academics basically live in quarantine already, which, as someone in academia myself, I thought was both a good point and pretty hilarious. No offense, of course, to any academics with us today. But this new progressive left who supported finance capital and the Democratic Party in favor of the Trumpist extremists transitioned well into the U.S. proxy war in Ukraine, at least from the perspective of the U.S. State Department. So you have leftists and progressives now doing apologia for groups like the Azov Battalion, hailing the U.S. puppet leader Zelensky as a hero, cheering on more weapons sales to Ukraine, which have greatly enriched the military-industrial complex even more. And they've backed NATO's stated goal of destroying the Russian state, which a few years ago NATO said in a summit was their primary goal going forward, along with destroying China. Meanwhile, folks like Donald Trump, Tucker Carlson, and the MAGA Republicans have been questioning why the U.S. can afford to send millions of dollars to Ukraine, but not invest any money here at home. And also, we've had Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez recently being called out by hecklers for voting to send $40 billion of weapons to Ukraine. And again, I don't think MAGA communism is the answer here, right? I don't think we look at these progressive leftists like AOC, who have failed to thoroughly combat finance capitalism or finance capital and imperialism. and just steer into the MAGA movement, right? That's not the answer. MAGA communism is not the answer. The answer is dialectical materialism and communism. Workers aren't stupid. They don't need some magic word or some magic slogan that's all of a sudden going to make them be on the left or make them be communists. They need dialectical materialist education in this method of analyzing the world and of analyzing capitalism and modes of production. Because workers already hate the right people, like Bill Gates and these investors, but they're super susceptible to right-wing pseudo-populists like Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis. So again, the answer isn't to steer into folks like Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis, these liars. Dialectical materialism is the answer, directing the discontent of workers and their hate for these folks like Gates at capitalism, and also expose these pseudo-populists like DeSantis and Trump, which only the dialectical materialist method can. Because it shows you that DeSantis and Trump don't care about the working masses. They care about the same corporations as the Democrats. They just use more abrasive rhetoric or more populist rhetoric. And through educating people on dialectical materialism, we can give them the tools to not fall for these pseudo-populists or not fall for the pseudo-populism. But we're not going to do this by labeling, all the workers as a basket of deplorables or whatever. We need real organization and real education on the ground so people can see through all this BS that is the American political circus. So, this applies, teaching people dialectical materialism applies to helping them see through the healthcare system or see who dominates the healthcare system, and allows them to point their concerns or their anger at capital. And dialectical materialism will also help people make a better analysis of the war in Ukraine. I think I've seen a lot of people almost steering into Russian nationalism or putting, a whole bunch of Russian flags in their bio on Twitter, and whatever, do what you want, but this isn't going to help end the proxy war in Ukraine. Right? What's going to help end the proxy war in Ukraine and what's going to help Westerners living in the imperial core see through the imperialist propaganda is, again, dialectical materialism, educating people on Lenin's analysis of imperialism as a stage of capitalism, as the highest stage of capitalism, not just falling into campism and rooting for Russia like it's some sort of team sport rather than in a war where thousands of people were dying, that we were pushed towards by NATO. So again, there's no magic slogan. It doesn't exist. There's no, right set of words that we're going to say, and all of a sudden the workers are going to be on our side or be Marxist. This can only happen through hard work. It can only happen through hard work on the ground, education, organization, and going to where the workers are at. And this is where I think we should put most of our focus, rather than distractions like MAGA communism, which ultimately stem from the bourgeois political circus. They stem from the pseudo-populism of Donald Trump trying to portray himself as opposed to Hillary Clinton. We need to focus on the working class because they are the working class, because they are the workers and have to sell their labor power based on their relations to the means of production. We don't need to take, whatever popular flash in the pan bourgeois political movements there are and make them our own. We can go to those movements, we can educate those people, but the key is to go and educate them, not to think that there's some magic slogan that's going to win them to our side. So yeah, that is my presentation.
Thank you, Eddie. Let's take a short break here. And what I'd like to do is call on Gene. Let me allow him to unmute. If you'd unmute yourself, Gene, and announce some of our future sessions. You're unmuted.
Okay, yeah, and I'm also visible. So yeah, it took a little doing here. I was still kind of munching my cereal. I expected a longer talk, so no, excellent. Thank you so much for your talk. It was really good, and I'm looking forward to the discussion, and I'm sure everybody is. And what I want to do is just remind you that we're going to continue to have excellent sessions coming up. Next week, we're going to go back a couple of centuries and talk about the London Revolution of 1640 to 1643 and the whole thing there. But again, our speaker, Michael Stura, will educate us that this was in fact a real revolution. Continuing, we're really happy we have Pierre Lebosset speaking on the crisis in Haiti, which we're all very aware of and what's going on then. And then our very own Raj Sahai will speak about the fourth political theory, the challenge of Alexander Dugin, sometimes called the Putin's brain, but I think that's not the best term for him. And then we have other things coming up, Iran, communism and anti-communism, and other things. So we have some great programs coming up. They're listed on our website. And if you want to get our regular email reminders, you can sign up for them on the website, iccsmarx.org. And back to you, Alan.
Thank you, Gene. Yeah, again, I just want to remind everybody that our website is iccsmarx.org. And on our website, we have a sign up that comes up when you first come to the site. If you sign up for our email list, you'll receive a weekly notification of upcoming events. There are also more information about upcoming events on the website, as well as information about past events going back quite a few years. I think we have almost 10 years worth of programs listed on there, including YouTube videos for most of our sessions. Those can be accessed through our website or through our YouTube channel, which is ICCSmarxist.org. And you can also, if you wish to contact us, we have a contact form on the website that you can send us a message. We'll get back to you promptly. Also want to remind people that we are accepting donations to help us with our programs. The information about how to donate is on the website, so a link from the homepage. So please take a look at that. Okay, so with that, let's shift over to our question and answers. And we already have several people have raised their hands asking questions. So I'm going to take people in order. So I'm going to start with Mike, Richard, and then Roger Harris. Boy, we just got like a flurry of people raising their hands. So let's start with those three. And if you guys would take about 2 or 3 minutes on your question or comment, we'd appreciate it. And also, Mike, if you have any comment on next week's session, we'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm presuming it's the first. I presume he's talking about the sort of the bourgeois revolution, which will be really interesting, and it kind of segues into the point I'm going to mention. Actually, the fact that all these revolutions begin as a sort of a dialectical process, which consists of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. And over time, the synthesis becomes a thesis, then is ripe for change. And part of that process of change links to the consciousness of the participants. So I think the speaker next week will probably say that the bourgeoisie were the first class that was conscious of itself as a class, and therefore were very able to successfully bring about their bourgeois revolution. And working people have been struggling under the yoke of that revolution for at least the last 300 years. And I think that was an excellent speaker, so thank you very much for coming and talking to us. But there's 2 things you said which interested me. The first one is you mentioned the word compassion. And I think ordinary working people do need to be treated with compassion. I don't think they fully appreciate or understand the mechanics of their own economic subjugation and sort of wage slavery, if you like. But I think they also need reassurance. And that reassurance has to do with the fact that there's nothing hostile to the concept of freedom within Marxism. And I think it's all too easy for those of us on the left, the sort of the non-Marxist left, if you like, to present Marxism, Marxist-Leninism, as intrinsically hostile to democracy, to freedom, to liberty, and those things. And I just wonder what your thoughts are on that. I mean, when you're you've got a big following, do those issues about freedom and equality and liberty come up, and does anybody critique what you're offering as by way of your argument on the basis that they associate Marxism with the opposite of those things?
Absolutely. Thank you for your question. That's something we pretty much experience every day. I mean, we don't necessarily spend a lot of our time reading comments or replies that we get on social media, because a lot of them tend to just be not very thoughtful, and some of them are just vitriolic. But yeah, there's a constant attempt to associate Marxism with authoritarianism, totalitarianism, and a constant attempt to, I'll make a video explaining that the healthcare system is controlled by finance capitalists, and people will say, oh, but what about the gulags in the Soviet Union?
Yeah, exactly.
That's always a point to this authoritarianism. But I do like to show one of the arguments that I made that I found I really like, is that Marxism sort of makes these ideals of liberalism, like freedom, possible. Because you're never going to have freedom. You're always going to have an authoritarian system so long as you have capitalism. The capitalists are going to control things. You need to change the mode of production, not just the political system. So I try and point to that as one of the failures of liberal democracy, that it can't live up to its own ideals. And Carlos and I have another saying, I believe it's from Daniel De Leon, that we use, where like Marxist theory is sort of like a boat, or it's a boat, and the Marxist movement is a boat, sorry. And the theory is the base of the boat, the wood, the framework. And then morality, or, concepts like freedom are the sails, or the wind that moves the sails. So you appeal to people's morality, you appeal to things like freedom, with an understanding of Marxist theory, as the only way to actually get to a real free society.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with that. I mean, the freedom that we talk about today in the sort of capitalist West is a bourgeois freedom, not an actual freedom. It's a freedom which only benefits you if you're wealthy enough to fully take advantage of it. And that's the sort of that's the kind of the basic mechanical principle that Marx identified, back in the 19th century, that all these principles, justice, liberty, freedom, and all those things, they have to be cast through the prism of bourgeois to fully appreciate what the non-bourgeois version of those things actually looks like. But it seems to me that what we've tended to do is stray in towards authoritarianism as an alternative to proper non-bourgeois freedom. Chuck the bourgeois out, keep the freedom, rather than chuck the freedom out.
Okay, next up is Richard W., followed by Roger, and then Janet. And I am keeping an order here, so please bear with me. I think sometimes people pop on before I catch it. So next is Richard W., if you would unmute yourself, followed by Roger, and then Janet.
So thank you for coming and presenting, young Padawan, if you will. It's good to see presentations by the youngsters here. I posted something in the chat regarding sort of alluding to something you briefly commented on, and that is that I think his name's Robert Kraft, had an editorial in These Times. I think it's the latest issue of In These Times. I actually tried to copy a link, but I couldn't. In which he noted the emergence of social media in the Black Lives Matter movement as becoming more important in the organizing, in any case, organizing tool for social movements. And I was wondering if you could comment, you sort of alluded to that a little bit, and mentioning TikTok, but I was wondering if you could mention that, one, as an organizing tool, two, how you use that to bridge the gap. I mean, there's a lot of oldsters here who who find those tools to be well, they're sort of they're not used to them. And if you're doing what you're doing to overcome those, and what you're doing to get out into the community, and I will say, there's something about wrestling that leads to a Marxist pride. I was a wrestler in my first semester at the University of Oregon. Sorry, University of Maine. So go wrestlers. Thank you.
Nice. Thank you for your question. I agree. I was able to convince about half of my college wrestling team to vote for Bernie Sanders in 2020, including a bunch who thought they were Republicans. But so
Bernie's not a Marxist.
right, true, but we're getting there. It's a step in the right direction. So as for using the means of communication, though, we believe that we have to there's a lot of education that can be done over the internet, and that's where we probably see the main role of Midwestern Marx. But you need to push people into actual organizing, otherwise there's no point to it. And that's kind of what I was alluding to with the part of my talk about the MAGA communism thing, or the people who, their version of anti-imperialism is just putting a Russian flag in their bio on Twitter and calling it a day. So when you have all this education and radicalization that's going on online, there's a tendency of people to just then be only online, to not get out in their communities and not do hard work. And, we end up in these sort of insular debates on Twitter that don't matter at all to working people, or working people wouldn't even know what we're talking about. And it becomes a little bit too online, sort of like an echo chamber. So I think, what we really need to do is put in more work on the ground, which is part of the reason I started a CPUSA club in my area. So again, got a bunch of my former wrestling teammates helping out, trying to organize on the ground here. And I try and use that in the TikToks as an example. Here's what you need to do: form a club, start educating you and your friends theoretically, get out and get organized in your community, and sort of pushing people to basically get offline and go outside. That being said, everybody in my generation and the generation below me pretty much uses TikTok and Twitter and Instagram and all these means of communication. So, I think we'd be silly not to use them or to dismiss them. That doesn't mean I think everybody, is necessarily going to be suited to use those tools. The real work needs to be done in real life. But, for those of us who are skilled at using those means of communication, I think it's well worth it.
Okay, next is Roger, followed by Janet, Yusef, and then Peter. So Roger, if you would unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yes, thank you, Eddie, for an excellent presentation. And when the leftist says it's excellent, it means we agree with you. So that's also in terms of commonality. I did wrestle at one point, though my career was a little bit different than yours probably. I spent a lot of time looking at the ceiling in matches I was in. I wanted to make a comment and then a question. I think when we speak about healthcare, I think it's important to put out what a socialist model of healthcare is. And I think that's been left out a little bit too much from the debate, because it doesn't tell you what, it tells us what we're against. We're against, corporate domination and healthcare for profit. But what are we for? And I think if we look at a country like, let's say, Cuba, we'll see that the healthcare is sort of community organized rather than individualized. That health is considered a community issue, and not only a question of individual responsibility. And I think that's very key, because when we talk about mandates, we need to include the idea of communitarian values. Also, healthcare under socialist model is preventative, as opposed to if you get sick, we'll give you a pill. The idea is to prevent people from getting sick, and that's a very important difference. And then finally, in the socialist model, there's an emphasis on primary care as opposed to expensive machinery and specialization and highly technical healthcare. So my question has to do with some of the kind of debates that have gone on around the COVID thing, and obviously you're well informed about this. There are people like Jimmy Dore, and in particular Max Blumenthal, people that I find that I have a lot of affinity with, but I'm somewhat pained about what I consider sort of a diversion that they've taken over the COVID issue. So I'm wondering if maybe you could comment about Dore's position and Max's position, how we can unite with them, and where those positions might have gotten a bit in the weeds and have strayed really from socialist model to kind of a, well, strayed. I'll leave it there. So thank you.
Thank you very much. If you don't mind, first I'll respond to the comment you made, and then the question, because I think that's a really, really important point about the socialist model of healthcare. And I did an article for Midwestern Marx a month or two back. It was also something I did for my healthcare administration program that I turned into an article for Midwestern Marx, but it was an analysis of rural healthcare in the US and why we're failing to provide healthcare to rural areas and why there's such a lack of access. And basically what I argued is that we need to do exactly what Cuba and Venezuela did, build all these hospitals, create all these incentives to go to school and get a medical degree, making it more easy to do that, more affordable to do that. And then the program Cuba has, you get free med school as long as you go to the rural areas where there's a lack of healthcare for 2 years after you graduate, and serve those areas. So they have various programs, various planning methods set up to make sure that everyone receives healthcare. And, even in the bourgeois academy, that paper was well received by neoliberal professors, basically arguing that we need to do what Venezuela does. So yeah, I agree that that's a model to look at. And what's so interesting to me is in healthcare administration, what they say, like, this is the future of healthcare, this is the way to fix the problem. Their solution is a move from fee-for-service to value-based healthcare. So fee-for-service is the current model we have where providers are incentivized to sell as much healthcare as they can, so that they can make as much revenue or make as much surplus value. And what the administrators, at least in the academy, want to move towards is value-based, which is everything you said about a socialist model of healthcare and everything that Cuba's done. It's preventative, it's more communal and population-based. It's about decreasing the number of specialists and focusing more on primary care. So healthcare administration has figured this out. They figured out that we need to move towards a socialistic model, but they can't figure out any way to implement it. They can't figure out how they actually get this value-based model enacted. And of course, the answer is capital. The capitalists are making absurd profits off of the system. They're not going to change the system to be more communal and preventative, because then they wouldn't be able to sell as many pharmaceuticals or whatever else. So it's so interesting, but also infuriating studying healthcare administration. I listened to a lecture last week where the professor said it is a fallacy to say that we can't move to a value-based model of healthcare and also without cutting out corporate profits. Like, it is a fallacy to question corporate profits is what they tell you. And then they tell you, so it's a fallacy to question corporate profits. How do we move to a socialist model of healthcare? You just want to rip your hair out. But I think it's interesting that they've identified what we need to do. They just can't do it because capital's in the way. Yeah, and the question about Jimmy Dore and Max Blumenthal, I think, is good too. What maybe less so with Max, but with Jimmy, and what I've noticed with a lot of online content creators is once that's what you do full time, it's your source of income, and that becomes your source of means of subsistence. So there's a tendency to steer into what gets views, what brings people to the channel, more so than what's true or what's true but maybe unpopular. So I think Jimmy kind of just steered it, realized I can talk about COVID, I can talk about conspiracy theories, or I can talk about, I can, argue basically that vaccines don't work, even though even though the Lancet COVID Commission said that vaccines do work and that, we need more. So rather than looking at the truth, it becomes more, let me feed this audience of people who I know want to hear this about COVID, because that'll lead to more views and more money. So I think it's mostly a product of that, which is something we try really hard to avoid, but we feel the pull ourselves at Midwestern Marx, like, the videos that we like making and that we think are educational and important don't get as many views as, something that's a hot button issue or something that's appealing to some pre-existing political movement. So yeah, I guess that would be what I'd say to that.
Thank you. Next up is Janet, followed by Yusuf, Peter, Raj, Jean, and Anne. So Janet, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you. So thank you for your presentation and your work. I'm wondering if you're still supporting Bernie Sanders, who voted for the $40 billion package for U.S. arms to Ukraine. And I had thought back in 2016 and 2020, when he was trying to run for the president ticket on the Democratic platform, that he had to know about how the Democratic Party machine works, and that they would never allow him to become the candidate. So anyway, that aside, I'm wondering whether Midwestern Marx is addressing how in the US, health insurance is tied to the workplace versus single payer. And regarding a model for healthcare, what about socialized medicine, like what exists in the Veterans Administration system? And finally, and I assume Midwestern Marx is focusing on young people, but I'm wondering whether they have explored the movement to privatize Medicare by pushing Medicare Advantage. You referred to the hatred of Bill Gates, but I've heard people, this was when Medicare gets attacked all the time, you get people saying, government, keep your hands off of our Medicare. It's just nuts, but anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that points back to my point too of educating working people about the mechanisms that make up our system, because like you said, a lot of them say things like get the government out of Medicare. It's like the government is Medicare. I thought, we kind of take these for granted, like everyone knows that, right? But not everyone does, and it's because working people aren't told that or taught that. So yeah, it's something we've tried to educate people about. I guess I'll start with the Bernie question. I should have mentioned Bernie in my talk when I was talking about this emergent imperialist progressive movement. I think with the proxy war in Ukraine and really with both of his campaigns for the Democratic Party, Bernie pretty much was co-opted by the imperialist ruling class, a finance capitalist. We've been pretty clear about that with our audience, and we've done a couple of videos talking with people who worked on the campaign with us, addressing the flaws of Bernie, pointing out that the campaign wouldn't let us be critical of other Democrats because they said we had to beat Trump. So, you're not allowed to criticize folks like Joe Biden. So yeah, and I think I read Bernie's book too after the campaign ended. I think he was pretty socialistic, for lack of a better word, when he was an independent in Vermont. He would go to the unions, find out what they wanted, talk with working people, see what they wanted, and advocate for it, whether the Democrats or Republicans were advocating for it or not. And then as he got older and as he started running campaigns nationally, he just became more and more of a neoliberal, more and more of a Democrat, to the point where, by 1999, he was already voting for the bombing of Yugoslavia, which is where he split with Michael Parenti. It has only gotten worse since then. And yeah, I think the VA is a good model. And what's interesting is any forms of, socialized medicine in the US that exist are usually really popular. The VA is the largest provider of healthcare in the country. Medicaid and Medicare are the two most popular forms of insurance in the country. People, when they're on them, they greatly prefer them to private insurers. And again, I think that provides an opportunity to point to the successes of public healthcare within our own system, which I think Bernie's Medicare for All policy was actually a well-named policy for that reason, because it takes something that's already popular and already working in our system, Medicare, and pushes to make it universal. And with it being the most popular form of insurance, why wouldn't we make it universal? But again, that just comes back to education and dialectical materialism, like showing people what Medicare actually is, showing them that it's the private insurance companies who are literally just standing as like a mafia style middleman in between you and your healthcare so that they can profit gouge you. And they're also in bed with these conglomerates that make up the providers. So all these different factions of the healthcare system are controlled by these conglomerates. I think we got to point that out to people, but it's hard. So yeah, thank you for your question. I hope that answered it.
Thank you. Next is Yusef, Peter, Raj, Jean, and then Anne. So Yusef, unmute yourself. Go
Thank you very much for a wonderful talk. I have one question and some short comments. My question is, I can't quite understand what you meant by MAGA communism. So I'd like that to be clarified. Second, neoliberal is, I think, a word misused in American discourse. It comes from Europe, where a liberal means a liberal economist, a laissez-faire economist, more corresponding to the libertarians in the US. And let me comment that it's difficult to get more neoliberal than Donald Trump. Whereas Biden, to a very limited extent, went to Keynesian economics. Second is that I think it's a part of the problem of the peace movement in Israel and much of the left for accepting the discourse of the premises of the U.S. government establishment and so on. Whereas just adding, well, just don't put around, loading a gun, giving the gun and saying, I won't shoot. So could I have your response to this?
Thanks. That's an interesting point about neoliberalism. It has kind of become like a catch-all term in the West that's used to describe anybody on the anybody in favor of capitalism at the political level. So yeah, I'll have to think more about that one though. But thank you for that comment. And MAGA communism, I should have explained what that actually is. I take for granted that everybody is involved in online politics, as me and Carlos. But MAGA communism stemmed from these folks. Infrared is the name of one of the accounts or one of the organizations, and a guy named Haas, and then also a guy named Jackson Hinkle. And both of them are avowed Marxist-Leninists. They support Marxism-Leninism. Haas has a decent theoretical understanding. I'd say it's pretty good for his age. And then Jackson Hinkle doesn't know that much about theory. He's more of like a sort of YouTube online journalist. But they have basically made themselves diametrically opposed or positioned themselves directly opposed to leftists, or to people who call themselves leftists or progressives. So they're saying that Marxism is not, leftism. In fact, it's the opposite. And these folks like AOC and Bernie are the number one enemy in the United States. As one of their points, this emergent progressive movement is the number one enemy in the United States. And in fact, they say the most theoretically advanced section of the US working class is the MAGA movement, is the workers who supported Donald Trump. So then they believe that we should embrace MAGA communism, embrace the ideals or the principles that working class Trump supporters hold, and use that to bring them into a sort of Trumpist communist movement. Carlos and I, pretty much since the beginning, have thought it was a distraction. We think it's, MAGA stems from bourgeois politics. I mean, it stems from the political economy. Donald Trump's rise to power, of course, stems from material conditions. But, MAGA itself is this bourgeois political movement that's not even made up of majority working class people. It's a lot of the petty bourgeoisie and bourgeoisie who ended up supporting Trump. So, yeah, we've argued that it's a distraction. But yeah, it's a pretty hotly debated topic right now online.
Okay, next is Peter, followed by Raj, Jean, and Ann. Peter, if you would unmute yourself and ask your question. Thanks.
Hi. So this is a great conversation. I really love that Eddie is, talking and kind of sharing what he's doing, because it kind of makes me feel like I was 25 again. Because when I was Eddie's age, I was studying public health. I got a degree in public health. I wasn't a wrestler, but that's beside the point. And they have not changed. The public health academics in public health are saying exactly the same thing they said 40 years ago. There's nothing new, nothing different. They are still controlled and have always been controlled by, the health industry, really. So I'm sure you're not surprised to hear that. But some of the things you said really intrigued me. When you have Western Marxism I guess you no longer had, but you had 350,000 followers in TikTok or Twitter, whatever. I'm curious what that means, because I mean, I know what it means, but how does one interpret or evaluate that? To me, 350,000 is a lot of people. That's mass communication, really engaging with the masses in some form, even if it's very superficial. But how do you transform that mass outreach and communication into a real Marxist-Leninist movement, into a revolutionary movement, which I assume is what you want, certainly what I want. You're not going to get 350,000 Marxists or revolutionaries. You're not even going to get 3,000 probably. If you can get 35, that would be fabulous. I mean, I'm curious. You definitely have thought about this. How do you make use of the available methods that are out there, and how do you try and bring people from just watching the videos to actual participation? And that kind of follows another thing you've been saying over and over, which I hear you saying, that dialectical materialism is going to address this. It's going to, by understanding that, you're going to understand all the intricacies of capitalist operation and impact on society. But I question that. Dialectical materialism in itself. I don't think Marx really called it that. Engels did, but the kind of broader theme of Marxism by itself doesn't convert anybody, doesn't change anybody, doesn't organize anybody. So there has to be a process. There has to be some way to find some subset of those thousands of people that we're listening to engage them in a movement, in a process, in an organization. And you mentioned starting a club, but there's got to be I'm really interested in how you've thought about how to bring this mass communication into a more coherent, effective, and real organized force, even if it's very small, much smaller. So I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
Thank you. Yeah, that's probably the main question, or the biggest question that we're always asking ourselves, especially after the last account was banned, where we realized we had this platform of nearly 400,000 people that was taken away. But we started questioning, how do we get these people actually organized? We can keep growing our follower count all day, but that's not going to do anything materially. And now on TikTok, we're back up to 90,000 followers about, as well as like 25,000 on YouTube and 30,000 on our other channels. So again, it's a fairly big platform. And I recommend, if you want to see specifically what we're doing, we've created this playlist called How to Organize, where I'm showing people everything that I'm doing with my CPUSA club, how the kind of events that we're doing and how we're getting connected with organizations here locally, and trying to get connected with workers here locally. So leading by example for one. And then two, we've heavily stressed unionization. We've said, unionize your workplace, build these organs of direct worker power to fight against your boss and for your own benefit. And actually, we found out recently that one of the first Starbucks that was organized in the US were people who were inspired by us, who were Midwestern Marx fans. And I got to have a conversation with them about that. So and now we've seen a wave of service industries being unionized across the US. And I'd like to think our push towards unionization played, a very, very small role in that, but some kind of role, obviously, if the people on the ground were telling us that they're fans of Midwestern Marx. And I mean, if you look at our content compared to other, streamers or content creators or YouTube personalities, mostly what they do is just comment on the news. Comment on the news or comment on, any drama that's going on in the online political community. And there's very little focus on what I would say is like real education or real theoretical education. And there's very little focus on actually organizing. And again, I think that stems from the fact that people become attached to their online platforms as a way to make money. But yeah, we've tried to avoid that. And I don't know if I mentioned this, but we have a playlist called How to Organize. And that's where we have all this advice. And then our other thing that we've been stressing is that we need a real communist party in the US that is constituted by the theoretically advanced section of the working class. So we have criticisms of CPUSA, flaws with CPUSA, but we have been pushing our audience into CPUSA to get organized, to get active in the party, hoping to not transform any specific positions that the party takes, but just transform the party itself into a truly theoretically advanced party that's made up of workers or of the working class, to push more people into this party who are educating themselves, who are active on the ground, and hopefully that will develop and transform into a party that's truly representative of the workers, because we need a real organ of power. And that's one of the things we've noticed when telling people to organize. It's really hard when you don't have a party where you can say, just join them and get to work right away, like communists in China would be able to do. The party still needs to be built, party infrastructure still needs to be developed in this country. So we've been pushing people towards that. And then just trying to push people to educate themselves theoretically, so they can understand the world around them better, on top of all that. So yeah, hopefully that's a good enough answer.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Oh.
Next. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
So I was just going to say, it's very nice too to hear that someone else, another Marxist or another leftist, studied public health, because sometimes I feel very isolated. So
Yeah, well, don't because there are thousands of people have been down that trail decades before you. I eventually went into working in steel and became a steel worker and worked my way up as a leader of the Steelworkers Union. And that's really where you should be focusing. Or I don't want to tell you what to do, but the only way a revolutionary movement will happen in this country is focusing on the industrial proletariat. That's my perspective, and certainly that would help.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that that passed through my head. The other thing that we've said is you got to get to the industrial workers, and our buddy works in the rail union. He's worked his way up through the union, and he's doing great things. So we have a series. We haven't done a video in a while, talking to him about his union, how it operates, what the industrial workers are facing. And we communicate with him every day, and he guides what we do. Because I could not agree more. The service industry unionization is cool, but we need to get to those industrial workers if we're going to have a chance.
Great. Next is Raj, followed by Jean, followed by Anne. Thank you for your patience. Raj, if you would unmute yourself first and then ask your question.
Okay, couple of questions for you. Thank you. First of all, I'm very encouraged that you're doing this work in the Midwest, where I lived some 40, 50 years back. I was very young, and Vietnam War, I became active, and I was in the construction industry. I was an engineer. And so I was in touch with construction workers, later on with other workers as well. But back then, the construction workers and the workers in general in Chicago area were very hostile towards anti-Vietnam War movement, and talk of socialism went nowhere with them in general. And also among students, they were against the war, but the class consciousness wasn't there. And I guess the economy was sufficiently good that people didn't feel the pressure like they feel now. So I want to ask you, how do the workers react when you actually talk to them about Marxism and critique of capital and socialism? So that's my first question. The second is, healthcare industry is one area where the contradiction of capitalism is very sharp, because it directly affects people's health and well-being, and sometimes they can't afford. I mean, the things are so expensive, and healthcare systems don't provide you. I mean, there are limitations to what you can get out of them. Is very serious. And then the other aspect of healthcare, aside from taking care of health, primary health care, so you don't get sick, which I agree with, is the entire pollution and industrial production of food. That is a source of sickness. And so the struggle actually needs to expand to those areas if you're talking about healthcare. So I would like your comments on both of these. And thank you very much. I'm coming to Chicago first week of November, and if we could meet, that would be great. So I don't know how far you are from there. If you are in Iowa, that's quite a ways. But anyway, we can talk about it later.
For sure, I would love to. I'm about 2.5 hours from Chicago, so not a far drive at all. And
Okay.
Made trips there before, so definitely do that. That'd be great. Yeah, thanks for your question. As for the construction workers and during the time of the Vietnam War, I think one of the problems that we've pointed to is, like what you said, was a lack of class consciousness among the student movements, or among sort of the hippie movements, in that these movements were extremely alienating to a lot of workers, and then kind of alienated workers from anti-imperialism. And we know imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism, so to be anti-capitalist in today's world, we have to be anti-imperialist. So we've stressed the importance of that, but I mean, I think you have to meet people where they're at. I think you have to meet workers where they're at. You have to, one thing that I think we need to get better at is organizers in general, especially young people, like myself, is listening to what people actually think. Because most people aren't just irrational, or I mean, their ideas come from somewhere. What they think about the world comes from somewhere. So when talking to those people, you have to meet them where they're at, rather than beat them over the head, or attack them for supporting war crimes, which sometimes that stuff is called for and necessary. But when it comes to regular working class people, most of them are just deceived by the imperialist media. So meeting them with compassion and meeting them where they're at. And then also, I think the importance of showing the connection of capitalism and imperialism, showing that it's capital waging these imperialist wars, showing how imperialism affects people in the US. We were just talking about the VA, showing how the US doesn't take care of veterans when they come back from war. That's stuff that, even working class Republicans tend to really care about. As well as the fact that they're now, it might just be because Joe Biden is waging the proxy war in Ukraine that a lot of working class Republicans are against the war in Ukraine. But either way, regardless of why they're against what the US is doing, I think we need to capitalize on that, see that energy within workers who consider themselves Republicans or consider themselves on the right, see that there's, they're critical of this war in Ukraine, and draw the connection to capitalism and capitalist imperialism. Show that the capitalists have been looking to wage a proxy war against Russia, or have been using Ukraine as basically a puppet for the last however many years, you could almost say since World War II. So yeah, meeting them where they're at, again, like if a lot of these workers are skeptical about what Biden's doing in Ukraine, okay, understand that, tie the war in Ukraine to capitalism. At least that's what we've tried to do. And then as for addressing the broader problems when it comes to healthcare, 100% agree. And there's an incredible book, I believe it's by Howard Waitskin. I shouldn't say it's incredible because I haven't actually read it, but I know it exists. It's called The Second Sickness. And it's basically saying that no matter what we do with healthcare, we're never going to be able to treat people's real illnesses, because so many of these illnesses are brought on by capitalism. People are overworked. People are fed terrible, unhealthy food. As you say, they're surrounded by it. And then people don't have the time to look for healthy food and cook because they're too busy just trying to survive. And when people go into a doctor and they're sick because they're stressed out and overworked and overtired, the doctor can't say, well, just take a week off work, because people need to get paid wages and produce their means of subsistence. Or they need to sell their labor in order to get their means of subsistence. So there's no way of addressing all of these crises that we have, like the opioid crisis, which is stemmed from pharmaceutical companies making money off of selling drugs, without addressing, working conditions, the production of food, all these things that go far beyond the healthcare industry itself, and show the evils or the contradictions of capitalism.
I agree with you, but what I was looking for, how do the workers react to you when you interact with them on class issues? That's one specifically I want to know from your experience.
Yeah, it depends. I mean, if you talk with them about their workplace, their specific workplace, I find that they sound pretty much like a Marxist. They don't like their boss. They understand they're getting exploited. They understand how inefficient the system of production is. But a lot of times they're just scared of certain words. They're scared of the word communism, socialism, Marxism. And our buddy Noah, who's a writer and one of the people who really assists with a lot of what we're doing at Midwestern Marx, he was having a conversation with a Trump supporter the other day. And he said, look at how the media lies about you guys. They lie about Trump. You think that they're telling the truth about communism and socialism. And the guy was like, oh yeah, you're right. Maybe the media's been lying about them too. So people are open, but McCarthyism has made people so scared of these buzzwords of communism, socialism, Marxism. So a lot of the times I'll try not to bring up communism, Marxism, socialism right away in the conversation. We'll just talk about class and talk about the workplace. I mostly just try and talk with people about their workplace and their every day to day. But yeah, I mean, I've noticed though people in our generation don't have that same blockage in their head. It tends to be older people who have, they just think communism's evil. It's just the government runs everything and they control every aspect of your life and they're going to come take your toothbrush. So it's debunking a lot of myths for people like that. But I feel like younger people have not had the same sort of indoctrination and they're more open to it. So yeah, there's definitely a generational gap there that I've noticed.
Thank you.
Next is Jean, followed by Anne. So Jean.
Okay, well, thanks so much for your talk. This is really great. And I will confess that when I first came across your website, as I usually do, I scan find things that I disagree with that I could attack you on. And I have to say, I couldn't find any. So that's very, very good achievement in your part, I think. I really support that. Also, want to say that I'm also a Bernie fan. And, I don't like to I refuse to apologize for the failings of Bernie and the squad. But the other thing is, of course, that he did two things. He made socialism a acceptable term, which is important. And he also won over much of the younger generation to socialism. So I think these are very important achievements. And I spent most of my life in academia, and I found, I've been fortunate in that regard. I had a secure job, a good pension, so I didn't have to worry about things. And I also had freedom to teach my courses the way I wanted to. So again, it's a good career. And so anyway, and I have a good pension now, so I'm with healthcare benefits, so such as they are. But what I wanted to say is I noticed there was no mention in your talk about Roe versus Wade, and which I regard as just this horrible attack on not just the half of our population who are women, but the rest of us also, anybody that has women among their friends and family, which I think is most of us, this is an assault on the bodies, which really, takes control of their body away from them. And again, we had a good speaker some time ago from the PSL, Party for Socialism and Liberation, who discussed this, but also made the point, the other aspect of that is, women should have the free to choose to have a baby or not to have a baby, but also when they choose to have that baby, they should have some support from society in terms of childcare, in terms of whole things that it's expensive and time consuming, as your friend's going to certainly find out in terms of raising a baby. So, but I'd just like to go. I noticed there was no discussion of Roe versus Wade in your talk. And what is your position? And what do you think about that, particularly in terms of the coming Rovember, as some people call it? So go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, thank you. And I agree on the Bernie point. I think Bernie did a lot to popularize socialism, and I've heard people say, yes, he popularized socialism, but he also demonized countries like Cuba as evil. So he gave people, sort of an imperialist socialism, which I think there's truth to both those arguments. And, that makes our mission then to educate people about anti-imperialism, show people that socialism has to be anti-imperialist. But yeah, with Roe v. Wade, we decided, everybody in our collective pretty much felt unanimously about it, that we support a woman's right to choose. And we came out and we just tried to give an analysis of it that's critical of the Democrats, and critical of the fact that they weren't able to codify Roe v. Wade into law, and that basically when Roe got overturned, they used it as a tactic to mobilize voters, mobilize people to vote for the Democratic Party. When in fact the Democratic Party played a role in allowing this to happen. But the main theoretical point that we hammered out when it was going down, and that we're still hammering out, is this sort of concept of juristocracy, where more and more decisions are thrown to the courts so that they can be passed undemocratically. Some like 75% of Americans support a woman's right to choose. They don't want Roe v. Wade appealed. So it's not something that could pass democratically, at least if you're looking nationally. So they throw it to the courts and find a way for the courts to push it through. The primary example of that is probably the most notorious example is probably Citizens United, where they basically legalize political bribery by corporations through the courts. So there's an increasing move to do this. I think we saw that in the Trump administration too, with him appointing all these right-wing judges. So a move to using the courts to pass things that are undemocratic. And yeah, I think we need to organize people around this, like the reproduction of human life. I mean, Marxism is about analyzing the productive base. So that includes the production and reproduction of our means of subsistence, but also the reproduction of human life. So, this is not something that we should just allow the capitalists to control and take hold of. And I think we should point to workers and say, this should be your choice. This is something that should be determined by the people. Why are we allowing literally a handful of Supreme Court justices to make this decision for every woman in America? So yeah, we support a right to choose, support the use of Roe v. Wade to organize people against the ruling class. We just think that it's always good to remain critical of the Democrats.
Absolutely. But even within that, I still have my Settle for Biden cup, which I don't think people should take too seriously. But there's that. And I think the only other little statistic I read somewhere is the public support for the Supreme Court is at an all-time low, something like 10%, even lower than for Biden. So anyway, but thank you so much. I really appreciated your talk, and keep up the good work out there. You're doing great.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Next is Ann, followed by Norma, and then I have a question. So Ann, if you go ahead.
Sure. So I wanted to begin by offering a model for healthcare that most people don't know about, but that's the United Mine Workers Healthcare Fund, which actually begins not with prevention, but with rehabilitation. It began by going through the coalfield communities and taking people who had their backs broken or who had been severely injured in coal mines and bringing them to rehabilitation centers and paying for it. So it had this very strong social, committed, material aspect to it right from the get-go. And it evolved into a system of hospitals and clinics in the coal fields to serve those communities, to serve the children, families of coal miners with very minimal copay, almost nothing, and the ability to go to the doctor whenever one chose to, really. It was really something remarkable, and it still has remnants. I mean, I was part of that fund for many years, and I still receive a very small pension for the time that my former husband worked underground, and I still receive COVID messages from the fund that say, we care about your health. Are you vaccinated? This is, giving information, which is something that I think we could model as Marxists, that at least we know some information, not going into the conspiracy stuff and what really caused COVID, but honest, legitimate information for workers about what to do to protect themselves and their families, and an expression of how much we do value work. Now, the other thing that most of my questions have been answered, but one of the things that I think maybe we should be pointing out more when we talk about COVID is the racist aspect of this. In some places, 70% of the deaths were Black people. And that's been presented to the public. And I remember hearing it as Black people being suspicious of the healthcare system for very good reasons, not getting vaccinated and so forth. But it really isn't that. It's much more connected to the material conditions of Blacks and, in our situation, Latinos, where those are the essential workers. Those are the people that have to go to work, had to go to work. Those are people that live in urban areas, packed in. Those are people who live in multi-generational families. And so I think that I just was wondering kind of how dialectic materialism is, I'm not sure that education is a solution. I'm sorry, but I'm not sure that it is. I think you've addressed that somewhat in terms of organizing, but I think that active movement of actually doing something is something that we really lack. And, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't use social media. I'm just saying it's got to also have that aspect of outrage to it, and not outrage about, do we like Fauci or not? Do we like Gates or not? Much more of an outrage about our own conditions in our own communities. Sorry to be more of a comment than a question.
No, that's interesting. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think, I guess I would disagree that education isn't the answer or part of the answer. I think, again, I'll go back to the Daniel De Leon model of the boat. I think, education and theory and the dialectical materialist method is the way that we can see through the BS, that we can see through the propaganda. That being said, the main thing we need to do is get on the ground and actually be talking to workers, actually be making contact with workers, actually be doing stuff in real life and showing them how capitalism affects their everyday lives, which is the sails of the boat. So I don't think it's one or the other. I think it's a combination. And I do think that showing people how capitalism works and how it's not Bill Gates, it's capital that controls the healthcare system. It's finance capital. I do see that as useful, especially for reaching people who have this vitriolic hatred towards Bill Gates. And I've noticed that with TikTok, all I have to do is mention Bill Gates, and the video will get tens of thousands of views. But it's always pointing people towards a criticism of capitalism. And I do think that's helpful for a lot of workers who get sidetracked and distracted, or who are susceptible to pseudo populists like Trump. But yeah, I mean, I do agree that the racist aspect of the global vaccine apartheid, or the lack of proper medical commodities in various communities, it was absolutely racist. And the Lancet COVID Commission's final report on COVID determined that there was a racial element to who was able to get the vaccine and supplies and who wasn't. And yeah, I mean, I noticed that there were a lot of poor people who couldn't afford medical care during COVID, who were turning to drugs like ivermectin, which not is effective in treating the virus, or there's been no link to that, helping with the virus at all scientifically. But I think it was overlooked by Marxists. I think Marxists and a lot of leftists just attacked ivermectin. It's a conspiracy theory. It's coming from these QAnon Trumpists. They're trying to tell people to be anti-vax and take ivermectin. But what I was seeing in my experience was most of the people leaning towards this drug, ivermectin, or getting it illegally, were people who couldn't afford regular medical care, who were buying. And that's been a thing with ivermectin forever. People have been buying ivermectin or veterinary drugs that are meant for animals because they can't afford stuff from the pharmaceutical companies forever. So rather than giving, a thorough analysis of, something like people in poor communities taking ivermectin, the left just kind of jumped on attacking anybody who took ivermectin, called them a Trumpist or a conspiracy theorist. And of course, there were people like the popular podcaster Joe Rogan, who were promoting ivermectin and, promoting anti-scientific stuff. And that's all worth criticizing, but I still think we need to have compassion for the people who were tricked into believing stuff like that, or the people who were forced into using veterinary drugs because they couldn't afford.
See, I don't think it's about drugs at all. I don't even think it's about vaccines. I think it's about the conditions of our lives. And we're going to have repeated epidemics. It's not all over. And these are things that are caused by the way people live in modern society and the lack of protection of large portions of the community. So, I mean, the fact that African Americans are more prone to things like diabetes, it's a public health issue. It's not so much, can we afford a specific drug? Are we being denied a specific drug? It's not even a medical situation. It's a health situation. And they're two different things, I think. And I'm just saying those comprehensive community approaches are the only thing that's going to really work in any of this. Whether everybody gets vaccinated or not, what about the next one that comes along or the next variant that comes along? It's something that gets solved by the pharmaceutical industry.
Right. I think that goes back to what I was saying about the Weight Skin book, The Second Sickness, that capitalism will never, it's always going to make people sick, and it's never, just changing the healthcare system is never going to be enough. You have to change the system of food production, change these places where there's food deserts and all those things.
And that, I think, for me, is a more direct connect to dialectic materialism than, as a way of understanding the conditions of our lives more than understanding what the pharmaceutical companies are. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's both, though.
I would consider education. I mean, we're, school and education are two different things, right? Public education is a different thing than education. I think the way that people learn things is very complex, and I'm certainly for people learning things.
Good transition to Norma. Norma, can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, hey, Eddie. You've exposed yourself to all kinds of. I don't understand. Well, I understand these people are criticizing ourselves. All the reminders that you left out this and you didn't say that right and so on, are they just in the wrong place? It'd be neat if we could open up our mouths and have the whole thing come out at one time, all the qualifiers. But it doesn't work that way. You put out there some ideas and people are going to have to, they don't just accept it. They say, well, it failed in this and it failed in that. The big one is about Bernie, obviously the tool to use that. We all understand that he's held back by a system where if you say socialism, communism, you've got a whole other world to deal with. And whole thing. People know these things, and still they're charging you with not having fully commented about it, or you kind of sidestepped it and so forth. So I say that people need affirmation. People need to be told, yes, you really hate the subjugation in which you live, in whatever language a person uses, to tell them that. And to repeat it with regard to the structure of our lives, the job, that's another one, school is a job. Person has to get up, be waked up by their family out of a deep sleep, hurry up, get ready, have your breakfast, get your bus, go to school, sit down and listen to somebody tell you stuff that you're going to have to regurgitate, that you don't really have an opportunity to think about. I'm a candidate for school board in Berkeley on this basis. I start out talking with, we all hate school. People go, oh no, I loved it. And I say, well, that's selective amnesia. the brutality that school is in all kinds of ways. The same thing about structure. What was this thing? Oh, I've got a note up there in the chat, the connection to this person who wrote about why you can't do anything by using the law. He makes a structural analysis. I hope you get the link that I posted. It was in Harper's Magazine. If you can't get it because they require you to get a subscription, you can ask me for it. I'll put my email in the chat. It's a structural analysis of the place of law and how, you know, it brutalizes us. I mean, for one thing, it relies on precedent, and that's a problem. So I had about 64 things I posted. I post these brilliant things in the chat regularly, and I did here
Can
too.
we, actually, we have several other people, so let's go ahead and move
Yeah,
on.
you know, just another couple of things.
Well, not a couple. I think it's actually time to, we need
Well,
to,
now
to move on.
you can let me say the couple of things because I don't want to have to come back. Oh yeah, the big thing is that the conflict about Russia, Ukraine is because communism is creeping in throughout the world. One of our people said that the fog of anti-communism is lifting. And this has been frightening our owners for 110 years. And these are the conflicts that have been going on ever since the Bolshevik Revolution.
So Norma, that's been about over 4 minutes. So let's move on. Actually, Isvara has been very patient. If you would go ahead, Isvara, and ask your question. I think you muted yourself again, Isvara. There you go.
Am I unmuted?
You're good. Yeah.
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
You're fine.
Thank you for a superb presentation, Eddie. It was magnificently clear. I just wanted to ask you if you're in touch with the National Nurses Union, the largest nurses association, that now has a fantastic aim at getting Medicare for all. And it has a fantastic platform called Patients Over Profits. Unfortunately, I'm extremely limited with technology, so I cannot send the link, but I'm going to read it from their newsletter tomorrow. They are asking for more volunteers to participate for the kickoff of this campaign of Patients Over Profits. And it says info at Medicare number 4 all.org. And the other one, it says HTTPS, then bit.ly or something, then POPS special team kickoff. But I'm sorry, it can't be more clear, but I was wondering if you are aware of this campaign and if you're being in touch with them, because they are desperately trying to need more support. And they were about 75 signatures short of their goal last week for what they want to do. And it's extremely important to support them in this campaign.
Oh, wow. Thank you for sharing that with me. I found what you were talking about by searching it here online. So I will definitely be promoting that, because one of the goals of the CPUSA club I recently founded with some of my friends was to get in touch with nurses unions, because in my work in healthcare administration, I've identified them as the number one organ of worker power within the healthcare industry, the number one organ that's, advocating for the workers on the ground and promoting these policies like Medicare for all. So thank you so much for pointing me towards a way where I can support them. So hopefully that'll allow us to make a connection with the nurses union, which we've been trying to do. So appreciate it.
Okay, Kit, if you would go ahead and maybe try and keep your comments to about. Whoops. I think you've got an echo, Kit.
Yeah, that's Rich's cell phone. Anyway, Edward, thank you so much for coming to speak. It's people like you that get me excited because you offer the rest of us hope for, because we don't know how much longer we'll be around. And I definitely encourage your endeavors in organizing and spreading Marxism, Leninism, and to the workers. Anyway, I was just wondering about how do you talk to people about identity politics and address this trend that seems to be a dominant theme among the Democratic Party and many progressives these days. And also, can you put your contact information in the chat? Thank you.
Definitely. Thank you. I'll send my personal email and our Midwestern Marx email when I get a chance here. Or maybe after I answer this question, I'll put that in there. But yeah, that's a great question. We've identified identity politics as pretty much being the current, maybe not the current ideology of imperialism that's going too far, but we recognize the way that imperialism has totally co-opted identity politics and now use it to justify war, to the point where you have the CIA, doing these advertisements talking about how inclusive they are and, how they support people from different gender backgrounds or whatever else. And this is, it needs to be criticized. But again, I would say like the quote unquote MAGA communism folks, which is an emerging trend of young people, young Marxists, they go too far with it. They go too far to the point where they just make themselves anti-woke, as they call it. And that's all they talk about. All they're doing then is criticizing identity politics, and they're, resistant to recognizing systemic racism and the structures of racial suppression that exist and help support the capitalist ruling class, or help prop up the capitalist ruling class. So, there's a middle ground, but Carlos and I have both really gotten into the work of Hans-Georg Müller, who's a professor and philosopher originally from Germany, who's now doing work in China. And he has this analysis of what he calls wokeism, which is basically the use of identity politics to justify imperialism, justify capitalism, and just be pro-capitalist in general. That's what he defines as wokeism. We have used that term. Some people don't like that term. Some people feel like, being woke just means, some people have an affinity towards the word woke, and they see woke as a good thing. So they don't like using the word wokeism to describe identity politics, or the way that identity politics are used for imperialism. So one of the things we've started doing is using the word woke washing. So it's an action, it's the action of using identity politics for imperialist purposes. That is specifically what we're against, or for capitalist purposes. We're not against the liberation of different minority groups or identity groups, or against their struggle. Of course not. We're against the co-opting of those struggles for imperialist and capitalist purposes, which ultimately, leads to more suppression and exploitation of oppressed identity groups anyways.
Great. Eddie, if you would we're about ready to wrap up here. If you want to just take a few minutes and wrap up, if you have any closing remarks, big picture, whatever you'd like to speak about, go ahead and do that. And then we'll be wrapping up the formal part of the session. So go ahead and take it.
Thank you. Again, I just want to thank you all for having us on. It's really an honor and kind of crazy to me that I have so many smart people who have been involved with organizing for so long, who are interested in what we have to say or what I have to say, and are willing to ask me some questions. And yeah, I really appreciate it. I feel like I learned a lot today. And yeah, we've got midwesternmarx.com, our website, Midwestern Marx on YouTube, where we post and stream regularly. as well as a Twitch account, twitch.tv. Then we're on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, all the social media. So you can follow us there. We're working on right now the the Journal of American Socialist Studies Part 2. Carlos recently published his book, or edited a book of various Marxist writings called Marxism and the Dialectical Materialist Method. So our publishing press is always coming out with more stuff. So yeah, that's where you can find us. But yeah, I think I said pretty much everything I want to say. Thank you very much for having us. And Carlos wishes he could be here.
Great. We want to thank you. It was a really excellent quality presentation and responses to questions. I'd also like to thank our participants. I thought the quality of the questions today were really quite excellent, and one of the best discussions we've had in a long time. Our regards and congratulations to Carlos. Can you please communicate to him that we're to contact me, that we'd like to set him up for a slot to do his presentation? I want to encourage everybody to go to Midwestern Marx. In particular, check out the YouTube channel, Midwestern Marx. I think that if you subscribe and watch the videos, it's really a valuable experience. What we're going to do now is we're going to stop recording. People want to hang around for a while. Eddie, you're welcome to hang around, or if you have to leave, you have to leave, that's fine. But we'll just have some open discussion. And again, thank you very much. This is a great program, and appreciate the quality and the seriousness with which you took your presentation today. So thank you very much.
Institute for the Critical Study of Society at the Nebo Proctor Marxist Library receives no corporate funding, nor do we have any paid staff. We rely on the support of working class folks that share our commitment to the socialist legacy of Karl Marx. We continue to need funds to meet necessary expenses. Since we can no longer pass the hat at our in-person forums, please send contributions to our treasurer, either online via PayPal or by check. The PayPal ID is ICCS Sunday, SUNDAY, @yahoo.com, and the name is Richard Fallenbaum. And checks may be made out to Richard Fallenbaum and sent to him at 1225 Nielsen Street, Berkeley, California, 94706. Fallenbaum is spelled Fallenbaum. To donate directly to the Marxist Library, send a check to the Nebo Proctor Marxist Library at 6501 Telegraph Avenue, Oakland, California, 94609, or directly or donate online at www.paypal.me/npml. For information, write to npml at marxistlibr.org, and the website is marxistlibr.org.